Welcome to this space, a space to slow down, to understand where we come from, and to reconnect with our energy. This is not just a podcast, this is a moment to wake up. Hi everyone and welcome to my first episode. I am very happy to be there with you today. Be gentle is my first. But before we talk about motivation, before we talk about discipline, before we talk about change, we need to talk about where we come from. Because many of the struggle we face today did not start with us. They live in our habits, in our fears, and in our bodies. This episode is not about blaming the past. It's about understanding it. And it's called the invisible roots. So let's get started. In the Caribbean, our history is a history of survival. Colonialism was not only physical domination, it was psychological. It taught people to obey, to stay quiet, to endure. When survival is the priority, there is no space for comfort, no space to listen to the body. You eat when you can, you work when you are exhausted, and you keep going. And that survival mindset didn't disappear when history changed. It was transmitted quietly, silently. Nobody set us down and say, this is trauma. But we learned it anyway, through attitude, through silence, through sentences like, don't complain, be strong, life is hard, we have always done it this way. This phrase protected people once. But what helps us survive is not always what helps us thrive. So today, many of us feel blocked without knowing why. There is another invisible root we don't talk about enough, and it's uncomfortable because it comes from inside the community. Sometimes, when one of us start to rise, when one of us build something, when one of us become visible, the reaction is not always support. It's pressure, criticism, jealousy. In many cultures, this is called the crabs in a barrel mentality. When one crab tries to escape, the others pull him back down. This doesn't come from evil, it's come from scarcity. When people grow up believing there is never enough money, respect, opportunities, success feels like a threat. And here is the hardest truth to face. Sometimes we accept success more easily when it comes from outside because history trains our mind to see others as legitimate and ourselves as the one who should stay in place. This is what internalized oppression look like. So when your brother or sister rises, it doesn't only inspire, it exposes wounds. If we don't name this, we repeat it. Science helps us understand this more clearly today. There is a field called epigenetics. Epigenetics shows that extreme stress, chronic fear, hunger, violence can affect how genes express themselves. Not by changing the DNA, but by changing how the body reads it. Which means something very important. You can carry fears, stress, response, and survival reaction that you don't come from your own life. You didn't live the trauma, but your nervous system learned it. That's why some reactions feels automatic. Why rest feels unsafe, why change creates anxiety. Epigenetics doesn't mean we are doomed. It means awareness can interrupt the transmission. What was learned can be unlearned. Let me give you a very concrete example that you will recognize. For a long time, especially the old generation, many people in the Caribbean were afraid of dogs. Not because they had been beaten, not because of personal trauma. They were just afraid and nobody questioned it. It was normal. But history gives us an answer. During slavery, dogs were used as tools of oppression. They were trained to chase, to attack, to punish. That fear was not irrational, it was necessary for survival. Most of us never live that, and yet the fear exists. This is how memory travels through bodies, through nervous system. A fear doesn't need a personal trauma. It only needs a history. So, let me be very clear. If changing feels hard, it's not because you are lazy. If discipline feels exhausting, it's not because you are weak. If motivation disappears, it's not because you don't care. It's because your system learned to survive, not to choose. Your reaction makes sense when you understand what your body was trained to survive. There is one last question we need to ask ourselves. Important. Whether we admit it or not, we all know there is an invisible scale. A scale of value, a scale of legitimacy, a scale of who is expected to succeed and who is not. And deep down, many people in the Caribbean know where we have been placed on the scale, not by choice, by history. We know who is seen as above, who is seen as in the middle, who is seen expected to stay at the bottom. The most dangerous part is not the scale itself. It's when we start believing it, when we internalize it, when we pass it on. Now that we understand the mechanisms, the survival mindset, the scarcity, the inherited fears, well, we have to ask an uncomfortable question. Do we want this same position for our children? Do we want them to believe they should stay small, stay grateful for crumbs? Or do we want something else? Because here is the truth. There are young people in those islands full of ideas, full of creativity, full of intelligence. And there are also adults, not so young anymore, who still dream of building, creating, and transforming. The question is not whether we have potential, we do. The question is, do we choose comfort or evolution? Comfort keeps things familiar, even if familiar is painful. Evolution is uncomfortable, but it opens the future. Because if we don't consciously decide to climb, we unconsciously teach our children to stay where we are. And maybe the real responsibility of our generation is not to heal everything, but to stop transmitting the idea that there is a level we are not allowed to reach. To allow the Caribbean become a place where people don't just survive, but are expecting to rise. In the next episode, We'll leave history for a moment, not for too long, and look at our daily lives today. Because those invisible roots are showing up everywhere, in our bodies, in our families, in our exhaustion. That episode is called The Mirror. Take care of your energy because your energy is your responsibility. See you soon.